Okay, let's just go live. It's live. Okay, good. Thank you. Sorry about the delays there. Hopefully we are live now on LinkedIn Live. And thanks very much for Melanie for joining us. I think we're just waiting for some people to come on board. So thank you very much for that. We'll be joined shortly by Melanie Franklin. Melanie is the well, Melanie's many things actually, but she's the lead of the Change Management Institute in the UK. She's the chief examiner of the Agile Change Agent Qualification and works with quite large organizations like the UN to make change happening. We're going to discuss with Melanie a number of things today around post-COVID-19 world. I hope you're doing well in this situation. Obviously, it's been a lockdown for many people for nearly 3 to 4 months. But hopefully things are starting to improve out there. So look, we're going to be talking about automation, target operating model, cost-based savings. We're going to be talking about behavioral change and how to capitalize on it. And we're going to be talking about virtual leadership and how to work with teams and how you've moved the conversation online. So let's hope that this works really well. We'll be recording this. So if you don't manage to get online with this today, we'll be able to send you a copy of that. So no problem at all. And we'll do that right after this as well. So I'll make sure that goes out to everyone as well. So I'm just going to check that we're running live on that and make sure that's all working. And at least we're connected. Just if you can just give me a second. And yeah, if you, I'll bring in Melanie now, and hopefully this will all be working. And take a few seconds to go. Just give me a second. Live on my account, and there we go. Okay, cool. Right, we're bringing Melanie. Okay.
Hello.
There we go. Melanie, thanks for joining me.
Nice to be here. It's going to be an interesting conversation. I think you've got a whole load of questions for me, so I'm going to let you sort of start the ball rolling, and then I shall probably take over completely.
Fantastic. And what I'm going to do, Melanie, I'm just going to put a group chat out to everyone here while we're waiting, because make sure that the technology is working. But Melanie, before we start, I'd love just to share with our listeners and those who are just about to join. Can you share with us a little bit about your background and who you are? And yeah, I'll be really grateful for that, if that's okay.
That's fine. I started life over 30 years ago as a business analyst. Then I became a project manager, and I really, really enjoyed project management, but it was in the days of waterfall project management. So there was, this was before Prince 2 became the standard. And we were sort of working on projects. I took on more projects. I became a sort of program manager, stroke portfolio manager, and I carried on and became global head of project and program management for several of the investment banks. I then became the CEO of a training consultancy company, and then about nearly 10 years ago now, I became freelance, and I work for interesting organizations overseeing their large-scale transformations. So it's strategy work, but it's also capability building, which is where probably this conversation will take us, because I'm really interested in building up the skills of people to make a difference in their organizations. That means bringing together the project management world and the change management world to realize benefits. So if we don't come together, we won't get any benefits, because at the end of the day, it's not just the tangible changes that the projects deliver, but it's also the behavioural changes, the creating, if you like, of a new way of working. And when that becomes the new habit, then we realise the benefits, because it's only when you start working in the new way that the company can say, hey, we're more efficient, we've streamlined, or we've got a new service that's actually working for our customers. So that's really my enthusiasm, and I do this for fun. I absolutely love what I do.
Now, before we started this, and I can see a few people are still joining as we just passed the stream over to my LinkedIn profile as opposed to the company profile. So that's just taken a few minutes for people to come online. If you're watching this now, jump over to my profile on LinkedIn and you'll be able to get the live feed. How have you been coping with lockdown? I mean, you know, we talked about it just before we started, and there's obviously a lot of people that are not perhaps as, outgoing as yourself or I that, might have been struggling a little bit with it. But how's it going for you? And what advice would you give for people who are pushing through?
I think I'm in Spain. I arrived here a day before the official lockdown began to look after my elderly father. And it was really scary in the first few weeks because the rules here have been incredibly harsh, but we all adapted to them. 200 metres outside of your own home, only go out if you were going for your weekly shop or to put the garbage out. And basically we had week after week of that. What saved me, I was really lucky because I arrived on the Saturday and I started work on the Sunday with one of my groups in the Middle East. And so there was no time to think, oh, this is different. And I've worked 6 days a week, 10, 12, 14 hours a day, each of those 6 days. So I have Saturdays off, come what may. And the structure, it's the structure of my work that has given not just me, but also my elderly father some structure, because we have a clear delineation in our house about when we have a weekend. We start our weekend on a Friday night. I definitely don't work Saturdays at all. And on Sundays, I do my writing and my thinking, which I can do just sitting around. But that means that Monday to Friday, he has a routine, which is about, getting me cups of tea. He gets me breakfast, he gets me lunch, he gets me dinner. So I don't have to do anything domestic. And he has a structure, I have a structure. And I think that's what saved us. And what you and I were talking about before was that what I did alongside the programs that I'm overseeing is I continued with my training. I believe in investing in the future of my profession. I love my job. And I think if somebody with my experience isn't prepared to try and transfer their knowledge, then who will? So I moved my courses online. And what I found really rewarding is the fact that people coming on a couple of days of training, sometimes they've come on the change management practitioner, which is the full 5 days. Sometimes they're on the agile change agent, which is a couple of days. But the thing is, they've been with a team of people, a new group. They've formed relationships. They've got my energy. They've enjoyed the structure of learning, the structure of the course, having something to prepare for, building up new relationships. And as we were saying, if you are looking for work, you're out of contract, and this is a time that's not easy to get a new contract. No. It's very hard because you're lonely day after day. Where's the impetus? I've been there. I used to be a contractor years ago, and I remember what it's like if you're not in contract and you start to lose a structure and you start to lose contact with people. And this, of course, has accelerated it. And what I'm delighted by is the fact that people are, well, they're getting new qualifications, so they've got something concrete to update their CV with. I get them to write articles about their training because I'm saying on LinkedIn, say something, tell people what you've learned, what you know, wrap it into your experiences, show people you're up and running and you're invested in your career. And they're also making contacts behind the scenes with other people who are also in the same boat, who are supporting them. And I am delighted to say a very large number of the people who were out of contract have got new contracts as a result of their new energy, their new sort of organizational skills, and the fact that they've used the sort of a training event as a way of sort of almost maybe repositioning where they're up to. Yeah, and I am really, really delighted by that. So I just feel, I said to you, I joked it's like a social service, and it does. It means a lot to me that I hear what's going on. And I've also done quite a lot, which is sad, but I've done quite a lot in my role as the lead on the Change Management Institute in the UK, but also in my role as a trainer, a lot of mental health work behind the scenes, because I have had people absolutely in tears. I've had people feeling a sense of hopelessness and real fear. And I've just taken time out. I stumbled on one conversation with a guy. I'm not going to obviously tell you much, but let's say I was just in contact with him on what seemed like a very simple, straightforward thing. I was on the phone for a couple of hours because as we talked, it became apparent that he was really, really suffering from missing people. And his job involved meeting lots of different people every day, traveling all around London, lots of different locations, and he was really suffering. I'm glad to say he's much better now, but he is not the only one. There's been quite a few. And I think, therefore, those of us who do have the benefit of a job to do, we've got structure, we need to be thinking about those that perhaps need some support.
Couldn't agree more with that. Melanie, we're going to jump into some of the subjects that we've been discussing. Let's talk a little bit about, a post-COVID-19 world and around, organizations at the moment looking at automation. They're looking at their target operating model. What's that going to look like? Their cost-based savings. What can leaders do? What are businesses should be doing and thinking about doing in the next 3 to 6 months?
I think I run a sort of informal chief executive support group. So I do board advisory work anyway, but I have found that I do spend a lot of evenings in virtual gin and tonics with C-suite executives around the world talking about what's going on with them. So my comments are informed by what we're talking about. I think, number one, there is a real realization that wherever they'd got to on their virtual journey, it's not been good enough, certainly not for this. And therefore, there's, whether you call it the digital transformation or not, but certainly having had to move all staff to online working, they're now thinking, and their customers are online. So it's about how on earth do we rejig what it is we do? Even something as simple as a financial services organization having to rethink its know your customer rules, because as part of financial services legislation, you have to know that who you are dealing with. And a lot of the time that has meant that we go and present our passports, our driver's licenses, and we go and meet face to face with people. Well, if you can no longer do that, how do you rework your know your customer process to allow that to happen? How do you support? How do you make sure that staff can get work done if actually we haven't? There's one organisation that they didn't see this. They didn't see lockdown coming. How they missed it, I'm not sure. But anyway, they didn't see it coming, and basically they just left their offices one day and didn't go back. And so there were bundles of paperwork everywhere on the desks back in the office that staff couldn't access. And a huge number of staff hadn't taken laptops home, all sorts of things going on. It was chaos. But they've now, the first few weeks were a real mess, but they've made a huge change to how they do their work. I don't know any organization that hasn't implemented Microsoft Teams or Zoom or both in the last few months. So I think there's some changes there and a realization in the boardroom. Wow, we should have done this a long time ago. I think the second thing is a realization that if you're heading towards recession, now people as old as me have the benefits because we've been through several recessions before, and I am holding conversations with people about what happened in 2008, 2009, and to be honest, in the UK particularly, 2010 was when we really were bedding into that recession. And the key thing you're looking at is your customers do not want to pay for luxury services. What they want is they want streamlined, they want efficient, they want, as far as an elapsed time is concerned, they want short, because if your process is a bit of a muddle, then that means that it costs them more to engage with you. Their staff will have to pay more to sort you out. And from that perspective, that just doesn't make any sense. So I think that streamlining, automation has been a big issue. Several CIOs have said to me the same comment, which is effectively from a change management perspective, Mel, we've managed to achieve probably in a couple of weeks about 3-4 years worth of change, because moving all the automated tools that we wanted to use, and we were always told, oh, it's not right for this, or I'm not sure that would do, that'll dehumanize the customer experience, etc., etc. Wow, those went out the window pretty quickly. And I think from a CIO perspective and a business transformation perspective, there is a real desire to build on those changes, not roll back from them. And I think from a change management perspective, ironically, the longer any version of lockdown goes on works in our favor, because it beds down this as the new norm. So all sorts of new tools that are automating, streamlining what we do is actually sort of starting to become, with week after week of practice, something that people would then accept as the new norm. Maybe they won't move back to later on. So I think there's some very interesting things happening. But when it comes to what initiatives and therefore how people should be thinking about what work's going to be available, another organisation I think encapsulated what quite a few are saying. which is that at the end of the day, there is their automation piece that they are going to keep going. And when it comes to making an argument for to the finance director about what we should continue to invest in, you can actually see across a lot of organizations a very clear pattern of, well, okay, what we're going to be doing is this is the thing that we will be investing in. So you're telling me that we're going to take steps out of a process. You're going to tell me that we're going to rationalize our systems. Then we're going to do it. Now, target operating models was, if you like, I think I look back over all my conversations and all my work, and sort of creating a new target operating model has been the trendiest change of the last 2 years, and that has accelerated again. Also coming back, I know all of the major consultancies do the work on spans and layers. In other words, delayering your organization, streamlining it. And I'm doing some work on that with an organization at the moment, which just brings you back to the criteria, which is if you're going to delayer, and therefore you're going to make somebody sort of oversee a much wider group of people, a larger group, because we haven't got all of these sort of governance layers, then you're going to have to streamline. You're going to have an intuitive process. You can't have loops around the process. If you're trying to sort of try to oversee a lot more people, you're going to have commonality in the steps that they take. You're going to have to be very clear when something is an exceptional situation. And going back to the recessionary conversation, if you cannot service your customers in the most efficient way, then the costs go up for them, and they'll turn to somebody who can service them in an efficient way. So efficiency, again, keeps coming back to the fact that it's not just the finance director. I think it's going to be something around customer driven. At the end of the day, what we can charge our customers is not going to be as much as we would like. So margin is going to come under pressure. So if you haven't got a streamlined process, and to coexist alongside that, if you do have added value services, exceptional situations, you need to be clear about what they are, what their value is, and charge for them, not just forget to charge for them because you wrap it into things. So I think this has actually been a giant wake-up call for things that were happening anyway. So I don't think we've stepped that much off a cliff. I don't think we're in a completely different world, but I do think that the things that we've seen in the last few years around streamlining and automation are still with us, but perhaps there's more of an understanding of what that means. I think a lot of executives have had a very interesting experience themselves because they are having to engage with technology they don't usually do. Yeah. I think we're in an interesting place, but I don't think it's a strange place. I think it's an accelerated place, but I don't think it's strange.
Well, we touched on it before we went live, and I know I don't want to get talked in politics, but the bit I did want to touch on there just very quickly is, we talked about being positive and getting business moving and getting Britain moving and or other countries. Obviously, there's people who are listening to this in other countries. But what positive signs can we be saying to within organisations and businesses to try and help get businesses moving into a new way of working? I mean, what's your view on that?
I did economics as my first degree, so I'm going to keep things really simple, which is I think that if we all know that GDP is going to fall off a cliff, and in fact, the figures from the United Kingdom this morning, I don't think they are very high, but I don't think they're a great surprise to many of us. But I have started to recharacterize what we're doing as the lost year. In that everything that I'd sort of planned to do personally, I've sort of, this time next year, I'll start again. If I go back to the beginning of March and now 2021, I'll start my year again. So my view is, from a positive point of view, whatever I achieve this year is a bonus because, frankly, it's the lost year. I think from a GDP perspective, massive hit because actually the economy has stopped. But when it restarts, we haven't changed. It's a very unusual recession. It's not a recession that is made up of a longer term slowdown. It was, we stopped, we closed for business. And there are no factors that indicate that when we reopen for business, that the wider economic drivers have changed so much that we wouldn't want to go back to doing things like we want to travel. So from an airline perspective, they are talking about 3-year hits. It's going to take them 3 years to get back to the numbers that they had at the beginning of this year. But there's no earthly reason why they won't make those numbers and get back. There'll be pent up demand. It's the same as whether you were going to buy a new car or whether you still need to move house because you want to get near a good school for your kids.
Yeah.
All of those things there's pent up demand, which is not the usual in other recessions. And so I think for me, when I say it's the lost year, I sort of think, well, okay, we're going to have a really bad year, but the future is as soon as the doors open for business, we get back to business. I mean, if you look at some of the retailers that have succeeded, the shopping is huge. I mean, some of the retailers have been very clever. They've recognized that calls like this mean that we perhaps want tops, polo shirts, maybe jackets, but we don't want more formal clothing particularly. And those that were very, very quick to put all of those sort of needs up online have seen a massive amount of ordering going on. So the demand is still there. And I'm actually quite hopeful. I began to think a little while ago that when you get scientists who sort of talk about, and this was prevalent about 4 to 6 weeks ago, that we would have to remain in lockdown until there was a vaccine and all these sorts of things, that I began to think that, like the Second World War, that you could be imprisoned for actually saying very negative things because it had an impact. It was treasonous because it had an impact on the will of the entire country. And I did begin to think that maybe we should go back to something like that, because if you haven't got anything good to say, then keep your mouth shut. Because negativity breeds negativity. Totally. And there's a lot of people who have really struggled. So it is our job, those of us who are doing okay, it's our job to put out a positive message. And I really believe it. It's not rubbish. I think, the economic indicators, pent up demand, we have lost a lot. We won't. But if you look at it in terms of making it back up, no. But if you talk about as soon as the doors open, will we start to see business come back? Yes, we will.
Do you know what? I totally agree on that. And just to touch on a point there, and again, if you hear things from government who are a bit, worse recession for years, and then you look at the market, I'm a member of travel groups and they are itching to fly again. You've also think about, well, why would I have a Zoom conversation to be engaging with a customer? I can just do it on Zoom. Well, it's those sideline conversations. It's that coffee afterwards. It's that beer at the pub or whatever it is. It's those conversations that are going to move the needle forward for those businesses. And I'm absolutely agree with you there. I think we're going to see optimism is the key, and people are itching to get going again. So it's a great point there. Melanie, let's just talk about virtual leadership. And just to give some practical tips around this. So how people can work, in this environment now, how is virtual leadership changing? How can people adapt well? What practical tips can people do to manage teams who they're not seeing face-to-face, not having those relationships, they're not having those side conversations that we just said, building trust, they're having to do it over Zoom or Teams. What can people do in their organizations right now?
I'm certainly seeing winners and losers. I was only thinking about this morning because I'm overseeing a number of teams. And what I talk about with the losers is those that basically go silent. They might be very busy at work in their own little bubble. But I don't know that because they're not responding to emails. They're not arranging meetings. I'm sending out stuff. They're not replying. And at the end of the day, when it comes to virtual leadership, I think one of the things, and I'll send you all the links to some of the things I've been pulling together for people, but I think it's about being present, being trusted, and that requires quite a level of organization. I think one of the first things is that, and this is why I say if you go silent, it causes a huge problem, because at the end of the day, if you're going silent, people will put an interpretation on that either you are overwhelmed or you're disorganized or you're not working. But none of that is a positive spin. If I get an email, I'm obviously in the middle of a conversation with you right now, and that's an hour. out of my day. But as soon as I finish this, I'll just go through my emails, because there will be numerous emails. We all know that the traffic has gone through the roof. And I'll have a look and I'll see if people want things. If I can answer them there and then, I will get rid of them. But if there are things that are going to require more work, I will go back to that person and say, right, I've seen your request. I've put it in my diary. I will get it done by tonight, or I will get it done first thing Monday morning and come back to you. And what I'm doing is being organized enough to keep the flow of conversation going. Now, if I'm honest, that would be probably the same conversation if somebody saw me in the corridor and said, can you get that to me? Or I really need to see your thoughts on this. If they saw me in the corridor, they saw me in the canteen, that's the sort of thing they'd say to me. And I would obviously reply. I wouldn't walk past them in the corridor and just ignore them. So why do I do it via my emails? It's madness. So at the end of the day, there is something about keeping that communication going. I personally have found that with that aspect of my virtual leadership, being more present has required more effort, definitely. And I have two checks, really. At the end of the day, I try to go through everything and make sure that I haven't missed anything. And then often the 5-10 minutes before I go to sleep, I'm still sort of just what happened during the day. And inevitably something will pop up and I just send myself a quick reminder on the phone, and then I'll deal with it in the morning. Because I am very conscious that if something gets dropped, the silence from the other side, because I'm experiencing it and I am making some very negative judgments about people who cannot get their act together. Because I'm thinking, well, if you cannot reply to this email at some point in the week, then why would I want to use you for anything? Because you just don't seem to be able to keep a grip of things. It looks like you're drowning. Now, should we have a conversation about whether this is more of a mental health issue, or is it just the fact that, you can't be bothered? I'm not sure, but we need to talk, because at the moment, the opinion is, other people respond. Timely responses shows engagement, it shows commitment, it shows interest. And I think there is something around how we all behave. It's not virtual leadership in terms of I'm a senior leader virtual leadership. It's virtual leadership, personal responsibility virtual leadership. And how do we put ourselves across? I think something else that is incredibly important in that leadership as well is being more organized. I have to do more work ahead of time than I ever realized, because if I'm hosting a meeting, I'm absolutely clear now, probably more than I was before. What's the purpose of the meeting? Who needs to be there? Because if I try to get an hour in your diary on Microsoft Teams, well, there's only 8-9 working hours in the day. And an awful lot of people are booking 1-hour slots. So it's kind of reducing the amount of bandwidth you have. And I want to be clear that if I invite you to something, what's the purpose? Why do I need you, David? Why am I interrupting you? Because that's what I am. I'm disrupting your flow. So why do I need you? What is it that I need you to do in this meeting? What is it that I need from you? What do you need from me to be able to take part effectively? So I'm creating certainly more structured agendas, and I'm also Moscowing the hell out of those agendas. To be absolutely clear, put the must-have items first, because time can just evaporate. And I'm very clear, if I can get to the shoulds and the coulds, I'd be very happy. But if nothing else, maybe we just need to do the must-haves. As people contribute in the meeting, you sort of realize that some of these other things aren't quite as important. Ditch them. Don't just go, well, I'll keep going until the hour is up. I'm trying to get my teams to celebrate. We finished that in 20 minutes. Right, everybody hang up and go and do something else with your time. You don't need to wait till the full hour.
Yeah.
But it does require, I am having to think ahead more, and I'm having to be more careful. What is it that we're discussing? What do we need as a result of the discussion? Because I think in the first few weeks, there was an awful lot of chat, but not coming out with the outcomes. So now I'm sort of saying, as a result, what is it that we need to do as a result of this? And I think the second thing, McKinsey have written pretty well on this actually, is the psychological impact of this. I wouldn't normally have, I don't stand in a room normally with a mirror up to my face looking at myself. And yet how many times I'm trying to look at you. I'm not looking in the camera, guys, but I'm actually looking at the screen where David is to try to, for me, that feels like a normal conversation. But there I am, right on the right-hand side. And occasionally I look at myself and think, oh, heavens. And it requires that level of concentration. And I'm watching David's body language, and I'm also distracted by the fact that there's a whole load of comments that are coming in from people. So it's great that you're having by the way, I am reading them all at the same time that I'm talking, but it is that level of energy. I'm people who know me always sort of say, I don't know how you get everything done. I absolutely love what I do, and I put lots of energy into it. And I try to compartmentalize stuff. I know the neuroscience is that the brain doesn't really multitask. Multitasking is actually with the brain switches between tasks very, very quickly. So multitasking, you're not simultaneously doing things, you're switching very, very fast, which is incredibly stupid as far as the brain energy is concerned. So I tend to compartmentalize, focus on something, even if it's just 10 minutes of complete focus, then move to the next thing. So that's how I get through an awful lot of stuff. And I love what I do. But even somebody who's well known for being very productive, I spent the first few weeks beating myself up. And I kept saying to my friends, have I got lazier? Am I more stupid? I said, I'm getting to the end of like a 10-hour day when I might have done 12 or 14. I haven't had to do the commute. I haven't flown anywhere. And yet I'm shattered. And I've got nothing left in my head. I mean, I have watched wallpaper television for an hour at the end of the day and then sort of crawled off to bed, absolutely shattered before it all starts again. And I found the first few weeks so hard. And I think it is that concentration bit. So there's something about personal responsibility, but I think there's also, I know the phrase self-care is doing the rounds now, but there is something around that sort of personal leadership, lead your own time, lead your own stuff, that I think. And I think that's really helpful. I can see Jane, who's just put a comment on there, is also reminding us that there's a humanity, that time is needed for humanity on these calls. And that we need to turn our cameras on. I've had a great group that I've never met. I'm working with a group over a 4-week period, and we're chatting, and I'm seeing a lot of dogs. I'm seeing some cats, although they don't come online quite so. They don't walk in front of the camera much. We've had babies, we've had children. There was a 5-year-old the other day. She had a lovely lollipop, and she sat on her mum's knee while her mum did quite a lot of incisive analytical work in front of all of us, and she sort of like dozed in her mum's arms. I've had a 4-month-old who went off to sleep just by the sound of my voice. I don't know what that tells me about my own productivity, but there is something about getting to know each other's houses, and the fact I don't put a background on. This is one of the one of the rooms in the house I've rented here in Malaga, and it's probably not my decoration taste, but never mind. But I don't mind people seeing me. I'm often in the garden, so they see the trees. They hear 42 kilos of Labrador having his say, particularly if an Amazon driver arrives. And it's just, there's something about maybe put a bit of effort into being human as well. It doesn't, let's include that.
I think I agree with that comment. I said to my wife the other day, it feels a bit like Groundhog Day every day at the moment, literally grounding it out. And, with 2 young children here, and I don't know, more respect for mothers, more respect for teachers. I don't even have to look after the kids all day, and I'm knackered just hearing them and dealing with whatever. So we need to get back to schools. We need to get Britain moving again. Tell me, Melanie, what do you think? We just touched on it a little bit there, but moving this conversation online, we talked a bit about that. Yeah, how can people keep moving that conversation online, develop that online environment, keep engaged with their teammates, their peers, but also as we come out of this, how can we think about what a new opportunity is going to look like, and how can they engage with the workforce that they might be joining?
Yeah, I do think that as far as onboarding, if you're going to be joining a new role, I think there is plenty of things you can do to actually engage with colleagues. I mean, I started work with a new organisation, is it 2 days ago? And I have never met any of them face to face. So what I asked for very specifically was an opportunity to what I would normally do, meet with some of the key directors who I'm going to be working most closely with. Normally, we would have, I might have come into the office and got to know them a little bit. We might have gone for a coffee or for lunch. None of that's possible anymore. So what I've done is I've arranged some virtual gin and tonic sessions after work. And I thought one of the really important things about that was that it is outside of that meeting after meeting after meeting. It's still an online meeting. We were using Microsoft Teams, but you know, we were sat there. We both arranged to get. We had a drink. I had some. We had a bowl of crisps and a drink, and so did he. And it was just we put an hour in the diary, but we were just sat there chatting. We didn't take the full hour, and it was just getting to know each other, chatting about what I've been doing, what he's been doing, and just you've got to be fully present. I think you've got to be really interested and invested in the conversation, but putting those in place now, whether or not that's because you're joining a new firm or if you're working with a recruitment agent, it's about building that relationship so they get to know you, so they can pass on real stuff about your personality to those hiring managers. And also when you are involved in the interviews, again, it's about don't be afraid to be who you are, to be human. And to, you know, it's rather than sort of being completely formal. But I do think there is quite a lot to be done in terms of relationship building. There's one thing that's come up. We were talking on a members webinar at the Change Management Institute the other day. Which is around networking. And I think this applies to sales jobs. I think it applies to applying for new work and getting new programs set up, which is how do I find new connections? What has left us, and I cannot see it coming back in the near future, is things like expos and conferences, all sorts of breakfast briefings. I mean, when I'm in London, I would normally go to at least 2 meetups every week. Now, obviously, leading the Change Management Institute, often that might be put on by the Change Management Institute, but also I'd go to lots of agile meetups right across London, and there might be breakfast and all sorts of things. And I would meet new and interesting people, and I would expand my network that way. And none of that's possible. So I stepped back and thought, well, how do I continue to refresh the people that I know? And what I found is that I've joined different LinkedIn groups. I've posed different questions. I've been sort of starting to make connections with people I don't normally talk to. And at the Change Management Institute, we've been talking about how perhaps we put on some discussion sessions where actually, although we're sort of posing a question, we're putting you into sort of lots of little breakout rooms so that you can meet 2 or 3 other people and form a relationship, you know, over the sort of half an hour chatting and just, you know, we're actually thinking at the Change Management Institute of how we can facilitate that opportunity to meet others that you would normally have had a warm glass of wine with at one of our face-to-face events. How can you do the equivalent on one of our online events? And it's not about learning something specific. It's about, you know, how do we get to know all these different people? How do you expand your network? And it's the same if you're in sales. How do you find new potential customers if you can't go and visit them? You know, but I'm working with somebody here in Malaga. He's building up his business, and basically he is picking himself up from the fact that business went through the floor. So he's gone back over all of his existing customers, still trying to keep in contact with them, but he's expanded out his search way past the standard geography. He used to work in the southwest of England only. So now he's expanded out to the whole of the UK for the services he offers. And he's gone and looked at all of the companies that were similar to those he was working with in the Southwest. And he said, I built up a database of 350 different organizations that I'm now starting to talk to. And it's a very deliberate act about building up his customer base. And I think that he illustrates 2 things. One, that you continue to go and look for the people you want to have a meaningful conversation with and then start that conversation. And the second thing is that he's no longer bound by geographic limits, because if he's not in Plymouth, he doesn't have to just work around the Plymouth area. And therefore, it's been a real seismic shift for him going, oh, he was trapped down here in Malaga as well. So, but it was a case of, oh, I don't need to be bound by the geography. So I think there's a lot we can do. Absolutely.
I love the point about the gin and tonic, and I've heard that a few times, and whatever that form that comes, juice or coffee for the non-drinkers out there. But just to make that practical point, if I was joining an organization, I would be reaching out to those key stakeholders to organize that gin and tonic. It doesn't have to come from the leadership. It could come from you in that team to go and search them out and be brave and put that in their diary, send them a calendar, because they're probably fed up with having, well, not fed up, but they don't have those kind of opportunities every day in their diary or every week where they could just come away from the business work and talk about what's happening in those people's lives and how things can be improved. Do you see that working well?
It's working really, really well. And I'm not just doing it in the evenings. I obviously work in the Middle East. So sometimes I'm having a coffee with a plate of dates rather than a gin and tonic. And I've also said to some people, I've got one person that I'm working with, and probably at least once a week, I sort of say, do you fancy a cup of tea? We would normally sit down for a cup of tea and a biscuit if we were probably in the office. So that's what we're doing. And some people I might have had breakfast meetings with. I mean, it's different. So I've sort of said, do you fancy having a breakfast meeting? And one of the giggles has been, what have we chosen to bring? And literally, we're bringing the food to the table. So you can see that I've got a boiled egg and soldiers, or you can see I've got marmalade from the oranges in my friend's garden. But whatever it is, it's just there's a little bit of a talking point, and we are sort of saying we were going to eat breakfast anyway. Can I eat breakfast with you today rather than eating breakfast with my family? So I think there are lots of things you can do if you're just a bit creative. And frankly, it's outside of those real business hours. I have lunch with people. It's a half an hour, but I will have lunch with people. At the Change Management Institute, we're having our volunteers day is normally a solid half a day in a conference room where we have lots of breakout meetings. We have lots of, we make our plans for the next 6 months. We allocate tasks to each other. And we're going to do it on the 3rd of July, but it's going to be a picnic. We're doing a virtual picnic. Everybody brings their favourite picnic drink, their favourite picnic food. And, to be honest, a good hour of that agenda is going to be going around talking about that with each other and forming those relationships. I've had to step back and think about how we do that. So it's taken a bit of effort, and it will take effort to actually pull together my own picnic. Normally what we would have done on those meetings is just go to Pret and get a whole load of sandwiches sent in that we then would have moaned about. So this time I'm going to make a real effort, and I'm sure some people are going to do really brilliantly and amaze me with the way they've set things out. I'm probably just going to have a sandwich in a Tupperware box, but other people will be far more impressive. But it's about people's personality and the connections. We shouldn't ever forget the neuroscience, which is around, if I feel that I've got a connection with you, you're part of my tribe, that you and I share similar views on things, we've had similar experiences in the past, then my brain, when I'm listening to you, is using exactly the same part of the brain that it uses when it listens to my own voice. And when my brain is listening to me, it's not judgmental, it's not defensive, it's not critical. So I open up to you, and I become a far better correspondent. I'm interested in what you have to say. I park my judgment. I'm a better friend. As soon as I start to see those connections, it's just how the brain works. So we would be really stupid to try to edit that out of what we do. We've got to put it back in. And I think a lot of people are starting to realize that. And it's all of those things, including, hey, this is my household. I have called my father, who's nearly 86, into a variety of different meetings to say, hey, this is the guy. Look at this. My dad's just coming across to give me a cup of tea. Because I want you to know my family situation. Look, here's 42 kilos of Labrador. And he's got his big toy in his mouth. I want you to see my family because I want you to know me a little bit. Because if that's the case, then I know that you and I will work together far better.
Brilliant. Now we're going to pick up some of the questions and some of the comments in just a few minutes. And if you've got a question that you'd like to put to Melanie, put it in the comment section now. But what
Can I just read one out?
Yeah,
Can I
go
read
on
one
then.
out?
Go on. Which one do you want to read out?
Phil Fisher has said, we've introduced a coffee bot which automatically pairs random employees up for a coffee break. Really good, as we've been chatting to people we wouldn't normally get to chat with. I think that's absolutely fantastic. I've also known of other organisations that have taken the time to pair up people who are living alone and therefore and haven't had any support. They've actually paired up people in different parts of the country to actually have a sort of a buddy system, if you like. So I think the coffee bot and the buddy system are two really very important ideas.
I think that's great. And thanks, Phil, for that one. And I'll come back to a couple of other points you made as well, which was brilliant. Just talking to the market, I think there's also a lot of people out there that were, you know, going to change organization, going to change company. And all those plans have been put on hold. I mean, masses of people. What do you think, before we just take a few questions and a few more comments, what do you think people can do to help them excel in the new norm so they're ready for taking advantage of that environment?
I think at the end of the day, achievement is everything. I was commenting on somebody's LinkedIn profile only yesterday when he asked me for some advice. And I sort of said, you've used a whole load of keywords here, portfolio management, benefits realization, but you haven't told me anything about anything you've done in those areas. And I'm not interested in your job title. I'm interested in if I hired you, what would you do for me? What are you experienced in? What successes have you had? What outcomes have you achieved? Who for? What was the impact of those outcomes? So just put in your profile achievements. And I was actually talking to somebody the other day who was going to be moving firms and isn't. And I said, right, okay, you've made a sort of pact with yourself that you're going to take that off the table for 6 months. Fine. But in those 6 months, right, make sure you keep an achievements diary. Make sure that you get your qualifications up to date. Make sure that you take part in other conversations with different LinkedIn groups, for example. Post articles, share things. Make sure that you actually are creating that profile. So all of those things, they've never been more important. So it's all about achievement. And I think just do things like get your qualifications up to date. My biggest issue with some people is that you look through and they tell me they're in change management and all they've got is project management qualifications, or they tell me that they're in project or change management, but what I see is a Prince 2 qualification and nothing about agile, and that kind of ages them by about 20 years. And you think, right, okay, just get somebody to have an objective look. Somebody like you, David, you know, just have an objective look and say, do you know what, your CV looks a bit dated. It looks a bit, you know, it doesn't look like you've done much in the last 5 years. If ever there was a chance to really sort of put some effort into it, now is the time, definitely.
Let's touch on that comment from Jane real quickly. Thank you, Jane, for that. I know she just touched on that turning cameras on more than ever before, which is great. What you know, is that how can we help people to have that more confidence to do it? How does it help them to perhaps be, not the word noticed, but how does it help them with their own personal brand within that organization? What's the benefit for them, or what are you seeing that people can do?
Well, I've done a couple of things. Where I had somebody the other day who was he hadn't put a photograph on LinkedIn. And I showed him, I just did a quick thing where I showed him a screenshot of somebody with a photograph and somebody without. And I said, seriously, which one do you warm to most? And it was fairly obvious, you know, so this is not difficult stuff. Another thing that I've been doing, really practical stuff, is that sometimes I pick up my laptop and I show people who are hesitant about sharing their screen. I picked up my laptop and just showed them the complete chaos and mess that maybe is either side of my desk, and just said, for God's sake, if I'm prepared to show you what a mess I'm in and I'm still getting stuff done, what are you worried about? Or I'll point to a family member who's walking past and said, you know, it's humanized me, hasn't it? You know, and do you think any less of me? You don't, do you? So why do you think other people would think less of you? So I've tried to give sort of really practical examples from my own chaotic, messy life that makes people think, well, okay, maybe it's not the end of the world. That's what happens.
I think I just want to bring up this comment by Mark here. Thanks, Mark, for this. Mark said, yeah, the wording of email, etc., is crucial in leadership. Very easy to come across non-positive. These are great points, because that's a really difficult thing. Again, what could they be could they be doing video instead, or what can organizations do? How can they help?
Well, I think there's something about, we've always said, haven't we, criticize in private and praise in public. And I think in this online world, if I have got a problem, I am not going to try to phrase that wording in an email, because negative wording can, and certainly can make it worse if you're only hearing the words, if you're only reading my words. So if I've got a really challenging conversation, I'm going to have it on the phone for a start. Second thing I'm going to do is, if I've got a difficult email to write, I'm going to write it, I'm going to print it out, or put it up on the screen and have a read an hour later before I send it. And I'm going to I might even ask a family member, if you received this email, what would you think? How would you interpret it? As I totally agree with Mark, and it's nice to see you again, Mark. I haven't seen you for a while, so hello. That at the end of the day, think through what the impact might be on somebody else. Albert Morabian did work in the 1970s where he talked about the fact that only 7% of the communication we have as human beings is the words that we use. About a third of that communication is the tone of our voice, which you don't get from an email. And then the rest of it, another sort of almost 2/3, is the body language, which you don't get from an email. So have a think. And as you said, a nice little video clip goes a long way to showing the tone of voice, the body language, and the smile at the end of the day.
I'll just bring up that one from Stuart. Thanks, Stuart, for joining in between himself and Jane again. Talking about that clear agenda and that set of meetings from the outcome. I mean, I've been to so many meetings where actually no one has talked about that clear agenda. No one's talked about that set of meeting outcomes. Again, maybe not everyone's quite confident enough to put that message out from the start. What can you advise to them? What do you see working well? And Stuart, thanks for that comment as well.
I think that I'm just being very upfront and sort of saying, and if it's not my meeting and it's not being done, it's always kind of difficult. But I might say something like, "Hey guys, I'm really sorry. Just can I just take a moment to clarify? What is it that we must make a decision on in this meeting?" Because I've got so many meetings and they're all sort of starting to merge into one another. I'll make some kind of comment. It might be a self-deprecating comment, but the underlying is, why am I here? What is it that you need from me? And just to clarify, and you're right, there's an awful lot of meetings where people aren't doing that. So I'm going, no. Don't let it happen to you. Don't be a victim. Don't just sit there thinking, why am I listening to this? Just ask the question, what is it that we must achieve? What are the top 3 things that you'd like to get out of this meeting? It stuns me the number of times I ask, and I do this in coaching, and I'll say, what is it that you would like to be different by the end of this coaching session? What is it that you want to be able to do that you can't do now? And people think, oh, that's a really good question. I'm thinking, is it? But, just ask, why am I here? What is it that you need from me? And you might say, because I just want to make sure I've got all the right background papers. You could do this on an email beforehand if you can spot that there seems to be, shall we say, one of those meandering meetings that might be in your diary. Because if you sit on that call and it meanders around and you don't get anywhere, you've lost that hour and you'll have to make it up somewhere else. So, just ask.
Melanie, we're nearly at the 55-minute mark, so I'm going to stop now so everyone can enjoy that 5 minutes in case they've got another meeting at 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock or whatever time their time zone is. Melanie, thank you so much for giving me your time, giving the audience our time today. There were so many nuggets in there. If people want to connect in with Melanie, if you're not connected with her already, drop her a connection on LinkedIn. Write a note. I'll tell this as advice to anyone. Put a note. Make the effort to write a note of why you're connecting. Don't just send a connection request. It's lazy. It's unprofessional. Make the effort to put a thing in. It only takes a couple of seconds. Connect with Melanie. Melanie, anything else you'd like to say before we go? We'd love to see you again soon.
If you connect with me, you'll obviously get access to the resources, but I will send you, David, the links to a number of papers that I have written on this subject, so that you can sort of put those around to those that are interested.
Brilliant. And thanks for everyone for joining us, and also for reaching out and speaking to me on the phone in these last few months. I really appreciate it. And have a great afternoon and a good weekend, everyone.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Thanks,
See you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.